Yeah, for interns, fortunately, like I was making the point that this time around, it was quickly, sorted out. Community service doctors also quickly sorted out. It's now those ones who have actually done the statutory, statutory years, internship in community service, who are now fully qualified, independent practitioners, capable, and very competent.
That are ready.
Ready. Those are the ones who are now sitting at home. There's one doctor, an entire village queuing to see that one doctor, and in most instances, to get a repeat script for high blood medication or Panado.
Yes.
Now, we're saying you can't have a situation like that when you've got thousands sitting at home. Because those are the people that are supposed to say, instead of coming once on a Tuesday, you spread it out. There's a doctor every day for 5 days or 7 days. Therefore, you can choose to go on a Thursday, you won't queue.
There's no queue.
But the moment you say, in that entire locality, there's only going to be one doctor on a Tuesday, you're going to see the scariest queues
that you've ever seen.
And that's what our people are being subjected to.
King David Studio Podcast.
South Africa has one of the weirdest challenge, and I'll call it for what it is. We have unemployed doctors in South Africa, and the numbers are incredible. I don't even believe the numbers are real. It always sounds like a joke when you hear that there's a doctor as we speak right now, qualified medical doctor, who's home, who did not earn a salary for a while, and the prospects of a job are not even immediate. And I thought, we have to speak to people who know exactly what this problem is about. And that's why I decided to call Dr. Cedric Sihlangu of the South African, what is it? The South African Medical
Association Trade Union.
Of course, SAMATU.
Yes.
I wanted to say the whole thing, and that's why I dodged SAMATU. How are you?
Very well, thanks, David. How are you?
Awesome. It's such a pleasure because, and I wish we were talking about better issues, not this one. Because this one for me surprises me quite a bit. Why does South Africa have such an unusual problem? Yeah. Is it a common problem amongst other countries? What do you know?
Not really. In fact, remember, what you're seeing now is almost what I can call the Great Migration, where our own doctors are being absorbed en masse by a lot of other countries. You go to Canada, you go to Australia, the UK. These areas are taking up African doctors in particular, because of course we're quite well trained. So it would be a misinformation to say it's a problem across the board now.
Yeah,
we seem to be having this problem now particularly.
And you say now particularly, is it a relatively new problem?
Yeah, I'd say not longer than 5 years, because remember, I'm sure growing up, we all knew that, if you're a doctor, you'll never go out of a job, because the demand is it's always been so high. And even now, it's not that the demand is shifted. It's just that the government is claiming that there's no resources to appoint doctors, but generally, the demand is still staggering, in terms of the need of doctors in society, in the communities. But of course, we're looking at about 3-4 years ago, we started seeing this trend where come beginning of the year, suddenly there are budgetary constraints. There's no money to appoint. Initially it was interns who were actually statutorily meant to.
Immediately after you finish school.
Yeah.
So that was the problem.
It started there, and then it went over to community service, and now we've gotten to a stage where even post-community service, those who are now fully qualified independent practitioners who are meant to now, work freely, independently and service the country, they're now also not able to get jobs.
Jeez.
Yeah.
We'll get into the finer details. Where are you from?
Originally, I'm from Mpumalanga, in Nelspruit. That's my hometown. That's where I went to primary school, high school, and completed from there. And then did undergrad at Wits Medical School, completed there. Of course, did my statutory years as well, internship, community service.
Where did you do it?
I was at Rob Ferreira in Mpumalanga, Nelspruit.
Okay. So you went to give back to the people at home.
And from there, I went to Matikwan, which is also in Mpumalanga. It's a small community. That's where I did my community service.
The dream of being a doctor, where did that start for you?
Presumably from as far as I can remember, I suppose. When you're a young man, you look up to your father and you hear the dreams, and the dreams deferred, where you're told that I wanted to be a doctor, but because of family situation, I had to get a job earlier on so that I could take care of the sisters and the siblings and so forth. So I think it's something that used to play in the background to the extent where now I felt I could make a decision. I thought, maybe I should be this thing. but it's strange, because after doing my medical degree, then I also did a law degree, because I think I also had something that said, also do a bit of law, but then
Yeah.
I'm still practicing fully as a medical
As a medical
practitioner.
doctor.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's not often. Interesting. I know someone that did a law degree and then did a medical degree. And I don't know what he's doing now, to be honest, because possibilities are endless, I guess, in a situation like that. Yeah.
True.
And you're saying there was no doctor in the family?
No, there was no doctor in the family.
There was there a reference to a doctor around your
in the
immediate
community?
surrounding?
No. There were stories of one chap who became a doctor and unfortunately died young in a motor vehicle accident. But somebody that I never knew. I think it's one of those village tales that there was once a
there was
doctor.
one guy.
Yeah, there was one guy. And,
Yes.
But that's as far as I knew of any doctor in the community.
So you were the first?
First in the family. Yeah, first from my immediate surroundings. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did the family take that? This is a big achievement.
Look, it was a big deal. It was a big deal because obviously graduating out of an institution, and at that time we thought it was a reputable institution.
Yes.
Getting in was also another thing, and graduating from there. So it was quite an achievement. Obviously, also looking at the parents, with that element of pride, So it was quite a remarkable thing, at least for a young man, I suppose.
And taking you to school. Was it what did your parents do to be able to afford such an education?
I don't think to say they afforded it, but I was fortunate to get government funding, a bursary. But my mother's a teacher, who's been a teacher from as far as I could remember.
Yeah.
My dad was in government; he was an administrator. So that's
so they were working class.
The working class, yeah. So I never really, I wouldn't say I struggled throughout school and varsity, but I was just fortunate to also get a bursary on top of that to just help me to ease things for them as well.
Do you know why this part of the conversation matters to me? Because it describes somebody's life.
Of course. No, absolutely.
It describes somebody's exact circumstances.
Yeah, true.
And right now they're sitting at home doing very little.
Yeah.
Whoa. Let's talk about the cost of training doctors. How does and look, I don't expect you to probably know it now because you're not at school now. Yeah. But give me a sense of the cost of training a doctor from beginning to end.
It's a heck of a lot, and even the fees that you see on your prospectus, university prospectus, they're quite toned down in the sense that there's been background subsidies towards the training facilities itself. So there's a lot of money that goes into, subsidizing universities for the purpose of, qualifying graduates, especially medical graduates.
Yeah.
I mean, if it wasn't subsidized by government, I could imagine it would be staggering. But even as it is now, because you got to look at the tuition fees, you got to look at your accommodation, and of course these days there's not enough residences in the universities, so most likely you're looking at private facilities, and that they don't come cheap.
It's 4,000 rands a month.
Of course, yes. And obviously the subsistence and just staying alive, the food and everything. So give or take, I'll tell you, I'm looking back from our time, you wouldn't spend anything less than I suppose 700,000 rand.
Yeah.
At the time, it would have been 2 years ago. Now, so it would have been a couple of years ago. Now you are 2023. You dealing with a serious escalation of fees. I mean, you see students are fighting over fees all the time.
Of course.
So essentially, what has happened there is the fees are well above, in my assumption, well above $1 million for the duration of your 6 year or 7 year training.
Yeah.
And that's per student having to cough up over and above the subsidies that might be there here and there. Yeah.
$1 million and it's still subsidized.
Yeah. So that's what you might have to pay out of pocket for that duration of 6-7 years, over $1 million, over and above the fact that background subsidies are there towards the institutions themselves.
And student loans, is that a common space in training doctors?
Student loans are throughout the higher education sector.
Yes.
Because, of course, remember that people come from, different, what you call level of affordability.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we talk now of the so-called missing middle where you can't get NSFAS, you
can't get a loan, you can't get,
you
can't afford life, essentially.
Yeah, and sometimes you might find that you're not a very sports active person, so you couldn't get a sports bursary. academically, maybe you're not an overachiever, so you can't have the achievers bursary. So you're somewhere in the middle, and that's a big segment.
You're getting a 60,
yeah,
55,
yeah.
60.
So you're the average Joe, and
Yes.
now you're on your own. That's the bulk of obviously the student population. So sometimes with those type of situations, you defer to, or you just go straight for a loan as the means to breach whatever you might be getting from your parents or some partial funder, just to make ends meet and go through the curriculum.
And NSFAS, what role does it play in all of this?
Look, I mean, we know that government has got a responsibility towards education and towards ensuring that we graduate enough graduates to contribute to the skills economy. So NSFAS plays that role. It's almost a coffers, or it's money put aside to ensure that those who enter the university system, especially those obviously who are not well-to-do, those who are who would not be able to afford university if it wasn't for that fund. So it bridges that gap, but it's minute considering the demand for funding. That's why there's a view that says maybe we should go the route of free higher education, because NSFAS almost just scratches the surface, and the demand is quite high.
What is the picture look like for free higher education? Is it I just walk in and get an education?
I suppose, look, there are a lot of theories to it and a lot of schools of thought towards
Naturally.
it. Yeah, but the idea really is that the moment you're qualifying and the moment you within a university facility or higher education facility, money should not be an issue. It's almost similar to primary health care, if you were to compare.
Yes.
To say, when you go to a clinic, it should not be an issue of whether you've got 50 rand, 100 rand, or 500 rand. It should be you need health care, you get health care. That's really, at the basic, that's what it is. Yeah.
Whoa. It takes deep pockets to be able to afford that as a country.
Of course.
Our pockets seem to be deep enough to be able to afford a lot, but they seem to struggle to afford some of these things.
Yeah.
Because in one of the chats you had that I've seen, you speak of how money was available during COVID.
Yeah.
But it's never available to hire the very doctors.
Look, the situation is it's a strange situation that we find ourselves in. Even now, you're aware of the declaration of a state of disaster.
It depends which one.
Yeah,
because there's two
the floodings
that were announced in 1 week. 2 in 1 week.
Yeah. But what that does, invariably, obviously, it opens up the coffers. It makes resources. It allows for reprioritization of budgets and this and that. So what it tells you invariably is that the money is there, but it's an issue of where your priorities lie. Now, there have been some heads of state who have been quite very strong in pushing towards, education being a very, very crucial aspect. So they're able to say, my project will be education must be free. And they'll push aggressively towards that. It requires a lot of political will.
True.
Now, in our current situation, the problem is, you almost have, and I would hate to call it, but maybe doubting Thomases, where people are not sure they've got the money, but what to do with it. So it just does the routine that it usually does. There's no strong will to say we're going to take a very bold step and allocate money to this direction and back it up. What happens now is you just keep on, like we've seen with the recent issue of the Tottenham. Is it Tottenham?
Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, where you want to put a billion or something like that.
It's likely to be on a sleeve.
I wish they could put it on the Samatu bed just this side.
You'll be happy to carry it.
Yeah, I'd be happy.
For cheese.
For a fraction of it. But that's precisely it. To say if you don't prioritize, you're going to end up in situations like this where, problems keep on, escalating, but there's no real solutions to it.
I think of that, and we use this example, and acting CEO of Tourism SA, very strongly and without even mixing his words, he said, this money is allocated for this, for marketing.
Yes.
Even if we don't do Tottenham, we're going to do something similar to this. So money for other things is over there for those things. And that's probably why, in line with the very answer you've just given, is there enough allocated in the medical sector?
But that's precisely the point. You see, and I wouldn't say the CEO is incorrect. It's just unfortunate that the way things are, you've got money, and you say, I'm gonna spray it across. Never mind the fact that some needs are more urgent than others. So you cruising as if it's a free for all.
All is well.
All is well, and that's not the situation in this country. We're in a crisis, and if we don't take drastic steps to correct this by properly doing allocations or reallocations, if it means that you got to take from somewhere and bring it back to where it matters most, because with $1 billion, you could have absorbed all these doctors and you could have been servicing all the communities and solved even more problems than just appointing doctors. There's so many things you can do with $1 billion in South Africa today.
Yeah. So you're saying with even if that money is left there, it doesn't go to Tottenham. Please bring it to the medical sector, because you'll employ all the doctors that are lying at home unemployed.
And you'll solve even more problems. That's precisely the point, is that if you take the state as one entity, as government, as an entity, so the money is there. You can't say you are poor because you've got $500 here, R1 million here, and $400 this side, and then you say, no, I'm considering what I have here, therefore I'm poor.
Your left side is poor.
You've got $1 million in your other pocket. You are the human being. You are the entity.
A total human being. Yeah. You're not saying my left side is poor.
That's what the government is doing.
You use the word that stands out where you say we have a crisis.
It is.
How bad of a crisis is it when we talk the South African medical health sector? Look, it has a lot of different aspects to it. But how big of a crisis is it? Do your best to try to describe elements of it that define the word crisis in your sector.
Sure. Maybe you might have seen, or some of your viewers might have seen recently, a video from, I think, Tembisa Hospital, where you've got patients, I think it was probably a Saturday morning, so after a very busy Friday night, where in a busy casualty, there are patients lying on the floor, there are stab wounds, patients with stab wounds lying on the floor, still waiting to be attended to. You've got a queue of patients waiting to go into a triage. It's a little room where the nurses will take your vital signs and so forth. You've got an overflowing casualty in literal sense, where the cubicles where you're meant to attend patients, you now have, instead of having one patient, you'll have 2 or 3 in one cubicle. But even then,
a cubicle is where we close that tiny
tiny. So even then, you have 2 doctors attending to casualty, 2 doctors covering emergencies on call on that day. If you collapse and you what they call a P1 emergency, right? That you need urgent care now, and there are 4 of you who need that type of urgent care. Maybe you've got a stab in your neck, someone's got a stab in their chest. It means that we got to pick out of the 4 that need urgent care now, 1, because 2 doctors can only attend to 1 emergency at once. It's Dr. 1 and Dr. 2. Now it tells you that we're starting to play God, almost deciding who lives, who dies. So if you got to understand the seriousness of the situation, that's just one picture I can paint. Of course, we see that even in maternity wards, where, just an example, where you've got 4 or 5 women needing a cesarean section. They all are what you call in need of an emergency cesarean section, because the fetus is in distress for whatever reason. And you find there's only one operational theatre that night. So it means if you take woman A in theatre and it takes about 30 to 45 minutes for an operation, the other 3 or 4 are invariably going to be compromised. And those are situations that you have to grapple with.
Let's go back a minute to the stuff about a few stab wounds, all waiting at the same time. There are 2 doctors. Is it standard for 2 doctors in a township the size of Tembisa, who probably has almost 1 million people?
Now, when you talk about standards, we got to go back and almost try and define standards, because our standards have dropped so low that you even, are clueless of what the standard should be. But I'll tell you, if you go to a net care somewhere or any of the big facilities, the private facilities in the country, adequately staffed. Right? And even when there is an emergency, they're able to draw on other staff to come and attend. And that tells you that the split of the type of system that we have in private today, if you're in a real crisis and you're in a real emergency and you walk into or you are taken into a private facility, I kid you not, you'll be attended to within less than 20 minutes at max.
I've had a situation. I tore my rotator cuff myself, and I had to go in. I didn't know how bad my situation was, so I had to go in. I got help in 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So now the problem is in our public facility, and I'm going to make this point. 90% of the population, give or take, relies on this public healthcare
Absolutely.
system. So, and I make the point time and time again that the system is quite, use the term lopsided or so, that the bulk of the people that need the most resources have the least resources. So you'd naturally imagine that if Tembisa has got a population of X amount and it's usually busy on end of the month, Fridays and Saturdays, you need to have X number of staff. Maybe let's assume a good ratio would be for that night, maybe you need 4 or 5 or 7 or 10, qualified, functional, emergency practitioners in that facility, but you've got 2. It tells you already that there's the resources are not properly aligned.
Yeah.
And then you go to a private facility on a quiet night because it's only 10% of the population that uses that facility. Then you find that you've got
7.
a proper supply.
Find 7 of them.
That's the problem that we're faced with. It's the public is undersupplied with skills, and the private is oversupplied. But the two don't communicate.
That means there's jobs from the private sector. I'm asking this question with a fair level of ignorance. Yeah. The private sector and the public sector ultimately hire the same doctors.
Yeah.
You find those that work on both sides.
Yeah.
That means there are jobs available, isn't it, on the private sector? That's why I said I'm asking this with a fair level of ignorance.
Yeah, sure. Yes and no, for 2 reasons. One is that in the private sector, doctors, you regard them as self-employed. They usually are contractors to the big private hospitals. So they, instead of having a job, as you'd call it a job, if I'm a specialist in emergency medicine, I get a contract and I'm contracted to provide that service, right?
Okay.
Versus in government,
you have a job.
Yeah,
you work for BARA.
Yeah.
That means you work for the Department of Health. In that sense. Yeah.
Precisely. But even beyond that, even the little areas or pockets where you can appoint people in private, it would be few instances. For example, I'm a big emergency medicine Inc., right? So I run a casualty in maybe one of the private hospitals in A, in B, and in C. But I'm the one who's got the contract. Okay. So I might, under myself, I might then employ or appoint
doctors.
Maybe 4 or 5 other generalists. And sometimes they actually appointed on this short-term contracts. You'd maybe cover a weekend and you'd get paid. It's almost like a locum.
It's a locum.
It's like a locum.
Yeah.
So to say that there's employment there, it would not be absolutely accurate, but you may get those type of employments. It would not be as you would in government, where you've got now permanent employment. You work for this department or this hospital, long term. Yeah.
It should sound obvious.
Yeah.
That there's high demand for doctors based on the description we've painted with Tembisa, for example.
Yes.
The demand is ridiculous.
Yeah. And
why is it that we don't, and I include myself, because I believe we are collectively part of the problem, because we vote for people and we, you know what I mean? We are collectively part of the problem. Why is it that we don't realize the need for this very critical skill?
Yeah, look, maybe we do recognize the need, but maybe what is happening at a level of government is that there's just no execution, or there's failure. And I think I might have made this point in some other platform where I say one of the tragedies of our time is that those who preside over the public healthcare system, they themselves do not subscribe to it.
Ministers and
yeah, they don't subscribe to it. So now they need to allocate resources to doctors and I mean to health and so on and so forth. But when they're in need, they run to the private healthcare and they get taken care of very beautifully. I always make the point that if I'm an MEC and I've got a headache, they tell me, no, the neurologist is coming.
You don't get Panado.
No,
you get a neurologist.
If you got a bit of a chest pain, they say the cardiologist is coming. But the bulk of our people, in the far-flung communities, the poor and the marginalized, you genuinely have this tumor growing on your forehead.
Physically, we can see it.
You can see it. They tell you there's no doctor. Go home and die. And that's the reality of the situation. So at a political level, at a government level, there's almost just no incentive, or I would say there's nothing compelling for those who take decisions to take them urgently and speedily enough to ensure that this healthcare is functional, because they're taken care of.
Yeah. it's a sad picture. And I guess an ideal scenario should be government officials should never have private healthcare.
I was having this crazy thought to say maybe that's what is required from a reform perspective, and legislative reform perspective, to say everybody who's in government, from the level of your ministers going all the way to your MECs and your HODs.
I think
and
it
directors.
starts with DGs. You know,
and there must be strong regulation that says you will use the public healthcare system. You cannot be a member of these medical schemes or medical aids. I think if
you're not allowed.
Yeah, you're not allowed.
Yes.
It's outlawed. If it were to be outlawed, perhaps would see significant change in a short space of time, because now you got to take decisions that say, if this thing is not working and I'm in need of proper healthcare, I'm in trouble.
Because they will be telling stories of places that they have to go to.
Yes. Yes.
And their kids,
Yes.
and their
the family.
It should be the entire family.
Yes. You see, if that were to be something that gets passed and implemented, I think we could see some drastic change.
Do you know, I was it's a story I tell often. I drove to Fixbeck, very close to Lesotho, to go for a gig. I was scheduled to be there, say at 5, and I arrived at 6.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do because the roads are bad, and we budget our time according to what GPS tells us. And on that day it says, no, you'll get there at 5. We hit a snag with the road that for probably 50 kilometers of some of the deepest potholes you've ever seen. People have even created a road on the side, a parallel road, to avoid driving on this thing. We got there late and life carried on. I still managed to play. And Monday after that, I spoke to the government of the Free State. I had requested to have a chat with the MEC. Refused.
Of course.
Agreed. And then asked, what about?
Yeah.
And then I got a spokesperson.
Okay.
It's fine. The first question I asked was, which roads do you guys drive on? Because if you drove on the same roads that we use, surely this must affect you. Do you have a special one somewhere? And I guess it speaks to the very point you're making.
Of course, absolutely.
That unlike roads, which obviously this minister has to drive on and hide their head in shame, when it comes to the medical system, one, your treatment is private.
Yes.
A lot of it is private. We don't know where you go, and you can go in the darkness of the night.
You couldn't escape.
Do you know what I mean? You have such a huge escape that we have no idea today. Well, we know with the president, it's the military.
Of course.
But with ministers and so forth, we have no idea where they go when they're sick.
Of course.
But we know for sure that I don't think they go to Tembisa Hospital.
No, they don't, because if they did, it wouldn't be in the state that it's in currently. And obviously, the biggest problem that you face here is that, I mean, if you really, really, really want to delve into it, and you look at the quality of the hospitality, if you were to call it that, of private. No, if you've been there, you'd see how patients get treated. You get treated like you're a guest in a 5-star hotel.
I know.
And if you look at the conditions that our people have to be faced with, Kopara and all the other places, sleeping on the floor.
Dude.
And the minister gets a cough, quickly gets attended to in this very nice Porsche 5-star. Those are the real problems. Those are the real problems.
And as a result, there's been an increase in the number of private facilities.
Of course. Because
there's all these medical aids and all of that. They offer you this, why not take it?
Of course. I mean, obviously, it creates a bit of a serious split between the working class and those who, because for most of us now, the moment you get your first paycheck, you because you're scared for your life, you quickly get a medical aid. And you, even if it means it's half of your salary, some people are actually doing that.
And for the family, rather get this thing.
It's, in fact, today, if you come from a village or you come from Kokasi somewhere, one of the biggest achievements to show that you've made it in life is to say, I've got this card of gems or discovery or this and that. So suddenly you're somebody, because now you can afford private healthcare.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's been talk of this insurance.
NHI.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been talked for a while. It's starting to look like RDP houses.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think at the beginning of the year, it would have been probably January. I mean, the year just begun. There was this NHI, it's like a review committee or commission that we attended as the union. And one of the things that we raised sharply there was precisely what we're seeing now with, what happens is, what's happening now is some provinces, for example, KZN will put a moratorium in appointing registrars. So registrars are your trainee specialists.
Okay.
Now, if you're going to implement NHI, it would probably take a couple of years, maybe 2030 or beyond, right?
Yeah.
But by then, you gotta have trained adequate skills in terms of human capital
to be able to absorb,
that will be able to work in the system, because the system requires human capital.
Yes, it's very labor intensive.
Now, if you're not training doctors today, if you're not training specialists today, and you, for example, KZN says will not be appointing obstetrics and gynecology registrars, so meaning that the mothers that need to give birth 5 years down the line are in trouble, because the specialists that need to start now have 5 years to go before they are qualified. And let's assume you want to implement NHI in the near future, but you're not training the expertise now. Where are you going to get them from? Are you going to go call them up from the US
and say, come home?
Call them up from Canada? No, they're not going to come back. They're very comfortable there in the NHS in the UK. So the key thing is you got to start putting in infrastructure in place now. It's not only about building fancy model clinics and this, and it's also about training. And if you're not training, the NHI is in big trouble, because we're going to have beautiful facilities 10 years down the line with nobody to work in there.
Let's re-describe this. Is this already something that we're experiencing with this lack of 5-year ahead planning? Is it something that you find in your sector? I'm sure it's found in other sectors, but are you saying that's exactly what it is, or are you using KZN as one example?
No, it is precisely the situation. Remember, when government says to you, we are implementing austerity measures,
we're cutting down
the budget cuts.
No more water in meetings.
Yeah. So what they do, they do it across the board, including this vacant. So you have vacant posts that are not funded.
Yes.
So, for example, if you're supposed to be having a program that's training about 20 registrars in this discipline, and suddenly you only have 3 who are actively training, and the rest, being 17 or so, are vacant
and
but not funded.
So they don't exist, essentially.
Yeah. So there's nobody there. Yes. There's no warm body there. But time is moving.
Yes.
And it means that when these 3 qualify, they'll be so inundated with workload, because they're the only ones that are now meant to service a big community. And lo and behold, the 3 that we're talking about, 2 of them might go to private.
Yeah, of course. It's easier.
Yeah, so you're left with 1. Now, that's a looming crisis over and above where we are now.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How are we missing this? And I ask this question because the former Minister of Health is a doctor.
Yeah, of course.
And the current Minister of Health is a doctor.
The current one.
The one that just left is a doctor.
Of course. Yeah.
How are we missing this? Because you as a medical doctor, you can see this. Yeah. And your Samatu is doctors and legal people. Surely you can see this.
No, of course. I mean, it brings about the point again. Maybe to just go back in the story.
Yeah.
When there was an issue of appointing interns 2 years ago, then the minister had to appeal to Treasury, and I think there was another allocation of about $1 billion or so towards appointing. So this year, it was never really an issue to appoint interns in ComServe, and I think the previous year as well might have been the case.
Yeah.
But it tells you that government is one body. And I was making the point earlier that if you got different pockets,
you're still one person.
It's still you.
Yeah.
So yes, you might even have the best mind who's good at identifying a problem. But if government as a collective, as a body, is not acting in unison, it's not acting collectively, you're going to have this, you almost call them disjunctures, where things are just not clicking.
That's true.
And what you have now, you've got a treasury that would look at healthcare, which is a basic human right, the same way, and put it on par with advertising tourism. And I'm not saying tourism is not important for the economy. It's very important. But you got to you see, back then in psychology, we used to do something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Of course, yes.
But it tells you that there's level to needs. So you can't be self-actualizing if you haven't dealt with the basic needs.
With hunger and accommodation.
That's precisely the point. So if you've got a government that is either a bit myopic or disorganized, that's what you're gonna end up with.
Does it also speak to the reality on the ground of the very poor living right alongside the very rich. Our view of the world is not the same in that scenario, where the people in Alex see the world very different to the people in Sandton. And yet they live they are split by a road. It speaks to that as well.
But it also has a whole level of almost a ticking time bomb. Because, you can tolerate this up to so
That's
much,
true.
And, we don't want a situation where the country goes up in flames because people are just tired. People are tired of the government. People are tired of the failures of the government and the promises that are not being fulfilled. And if we persist and continue like this, the community, the 90% that we talk about, they're going to rise up. They're going to rise up against the government, but not only the government. They're going to rise up at those that they perceive as those who have.
Yeah.
And it creates a very, very dangerous situation for this country going forward. So if you're not able to take care of the basics, we are creating a brewing volcano. Literally.
Yeah. Do you know, interesting, Julius speaks of this. Julius Malema speaks of this ticking time bomb in a lot of his interviews. And it's a narrative that a lot of us and a lot of people are aware of.
Yes.
It's not something that you can pretend doesn't exist. You wonder sometimes if those that make decisions are aware of it. And because the interviewer asks him, but you are also the middle
elite.
and higher class. You're an elite. And he says, yes, I am. I am aware that I'm an elite. So I'm also in danger. You see. So he doesn't separate himself from the reality that you exist in. And Rupert speaks of it as well. He says the worst thing about being wealthy is when you're wealthy and the people around you are poor. There's no fun in that.
It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. So that's why I asked that what you're describing a government minister or government official, whether it's MMC or whoever, that lives a different level of life, and yet they're meant to be serving a different level of life.
Absolutely.
And the question is, are they able to see the differences in their lives? That's why the decisions they make don't make sense sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think somebody made the point, I can't remember when, that it's very rare that someone will fight a revolution that is not of their own choosing. They'll say that somebody else will fight for us. We believe that they'll fight for us, but they won't benefit. We'll benefit. So, I mean, what will end up happening is, because we see these guys driving in their big cars coming to these clinics, the CEOs coming to these facilities.
Clinics,
it'll create at some instance, because you see, it gets very emotional. Let me just give you an example. It gets very emotional in these casualties, and I've seen it in my time as a doctor in the front line, where there's nobody to attend to your family, and they pass on right in front of your eyes. And then you get this CEO comes walking in a very fancy suit, walking through. You say just walking by, demonstrating that they're CEO, right in front of a community or a family that has just lost their loved one because of the sheer incompetence of ensuring that there's adequate staffing in that facility. We've seen guns being pulled out in casualties from angry family members.
Yes.
So it tells you that very soon, I'm hoping it doesn't happen, that you'll start to see a real uproar, and we don't want it to get there. All we need is what we need to do is to give it our best and ensuring that there's adequate staffing and we do the work. But when we don't, the anger that comes with it is volcanic.
Are we training enough doctors?
We are not, and the reason why we are sending doctors to Cuba, students to Cuba, and we also see some students now some of them are going to the Ukraine, some are going to China, and some from historic times go to Russia. You remember some of our former ministers.
Even now there's a crisis with students that are stuck in China, rather, and some in Russia and all of that.
Absolutely. So there's a definite undersupply of doctors. There's no doubt about that. There's an undersupply of doctors, hence we go out to train more. But what is strange that our government does, it's almost as if they just can't think beyond the now. So they'll pick up a problem. We've got an undersupply of doctors. So no, we need to allocate money and send out students to go train and become doctors. And as soon as they do that, 5 years later, they come back. And now they are ready to serve the people. And we forgot that when we were sending you to train, we did not make allocations 5 years down the line for your salaries. And now when you get back, they tell you, there's no job, so maybe go back. Go look for employment somewhere there. So it defeats the whole purpose.
This is frustrating.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Why is it that we have an undersupply? Is it the interest? Because remember, it has to start with a kid from Mpumalanga who thinks they should be a doctor.
Well, I mean, it's not only that is not only localized to South Africa; it's a global phenomenon. Of course, training a medical graduate, of course, it's a lot of resources. It's also a lot of time invested. The program itself, and of course, within the selection criteria, you obviously got there's quite a lot of selection that goes into it.
Absolutely, there's a lot of what are these hurdles you have to jump as a young aspiring doctor.
Yeah, exactly. So from that perspective, you look at the number of medical schools that you have in the country. They're few, right? So it would mean that the output can only be so much. It's almost like the bottleneck phenomenon, where even if you have brilliant minds in the whole country, but the training will only mean that only so
many can go through.
Right? So then some of them will go train them outside. But so even outside, even the US and the other countries are struggling to keep up with the demand, because it's almost health is almost as important as a cup of water.
Exactly.
Right? So it means that if you don't take care of that very, very precious, I'll call it a commodity if you'd allow me, you are going to be undersupplied. And what countries need to do, which is what we are trying to do, is just try and beef up or
the
up
numbers.
The production.
Yes.
But even then, to keep up, because we almost remember we're coming from a historic apartheid past as well, where there's always been a marginalized section of the society, which is black largely.
Yes.
Now, white doctors would have inherently served largely those communities.
Yeah.
So the villages were always constantly underserviced.
Yeah.
Now we want to try and open up and then go and service those communities, but we have got about 20 years to catch up, if not 10.
Yeah.
Right. So already it tells you that you're chasing your tail. And there's the natural attrition as well.
You start the race already a few kilometers behind.
Yeah. Especially in this country because of the dynamics of apartheid. Yeah.
Have we? Because there are people who will argue and say you've had 28 years, give or take. Yeah. Have you reduced that gap at least by a minute?
Maybe one of the arguments in favor of saying now things are bad because of the amount that we have. Of course, if you were to compare just the number of doctors that we have now compared to back then, the number has
improved
as a factor of just the number. It has improved, but population growth as well has actually occurred.
Naturally.
So you're kind of facing a very difficult situation, because even though you're increasing production, the population itself is actually increasing. So
it's probably increasing at a faster rate than the production.
Yeah.
But what are the problems with getting doctors trained? Why are we struggling to get a tattoo to be a doctor? And for the school, you said the bottleneck has a problem.
Yeah.
What are the challenges with creating more schools and so forth and so forth? How many medical schools do we have? Vets,
I think it's about 7 or 8.
Medunsa and all of that. So it's not enough.
It's definitely not enough. I know there are new universities now. One is in Mpumalanga. I think the other one is in Northern Cape. Salt Plaki, I think, and University UMP.
They offer.
Yeah. So not as yet, but University of Limpopo is obviously now has got a medical school.
Okay.
So I think that is added.
with the Medunsa link.
So Medunsa is standalone now.
Yes.
But University of Limpopo now is actually having a medical school, and I think they've had their first graduates maybe a year or two ago. The first fully qualified.
Wow. Yes.
So now you're looking at the number from maybe UMP, University of Mpumalanga, also at some stage having a medical school, maybe having the Northern Cape University also having one. But even then, you still have a minute number.
Yeah.
If you compare, for example, Cuba, where they've got universities, medical schools left, right, and center, we're still far from there. But again, the only way to solve the problem is definitely creating space where you can be able to produce, and that would mean more training facilities,
more schools, more trainers, and more absorption of these once they qualify.
Absolutely.
Almost, we were having a chat before we started this conversation that it was guaranteed for a doctor to have a job. That's how we've always known it. But now it's a different space altogether.
Like I said, when I was aspiring to go to medical school, I was almost assured that, look, you'll never have to worry about a job. Today, it has changed. Today, we're sitting with a pile of doctors who are saying, please help us find jobs. And I'm like, is this really happening? You know, but also in a country that is in dire need
of doctors.
Of doctors, yeah.
Wow. I must tell you, every time I hear that, I don't believe it. And because it brings me to the question that speaks to training, availability of money, all those issues that they should be easy to solve.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about how doctors used to be treated very differently as students relative to others when it comes to accessing funding, accessing loans. Now, post being a doctor, I know as a lawyer and a doctor, you finish at the same time. A doctor will get loans from
you
get a car exactly before you even qualify.
Yeah, sure.
What is clearly now financial institutions must look at doctors very differently.
Well, especially with the rate of defaulting on those loans, because remember, and I was making the point. Now, if you qualify, you get into internship, and you start getting paid.
Yeah.
So when you start getting paid, you say, okay, I need a house or maybe an apartment, and then you say, I'm not gonna rent. I'm gonna purchase an apartment, get a bond. And then you say, well, I've been working my whole life. Now I have to be on call at night. I have to do this and that. So I need a car. And young guys generally, boys and girls, will buy your
nice car.
German cars and so forth.
You're a medical doctor after all.
Your title, you must keep up with the expectations, right?
Yes.
So you do that. And the first 12 months, it's all honky-dory. It's great. You've been paying religiously. And then post-internship, you're told, wait, there's a glitch. There's no available funds.
That's after 2 years.
Yeah, after 2 years.
Yeah.
You've been paying very well for 2 years. Now you can't go into community service because there's budgetary constraints. They're still trying to scrape around for some funds. So maybe in April, you might have a job in the new financial year. So now it's January, you're out of employment. It's February, you're out of employment, and you and I know what happens to the bank after 3 months.
Hey, what's going on here?
We'll bring back our assets. That type of thing. So it then means that, and we're seeing this, where more and more junior doctors are defaulting on their obligations, financial obligations. Their credit scores are plummeting. Right? Now, the banks are going to obviously be viewing that data and say, wait. We've got a problem here. This is not the historic doctor that we know.
No.
This is a different animal in a different state of affairs. Therefore, maybe we should not willy-nilly make credit available
for these doctors.
So it might lead us to a state where, doctors are going to struggle to get funding. Even for a simple thing as, buying a basic car to just get around and be able to do your call.
Wow. So much has changed.
The implications are humongous. Yeah.
So much has changed.
It has.
For me, it's the most shocking thing. What are the solutions, in your opinion? Are they as obvious? You've described some of them, but what, in your, if you were to be appointed Minister of Health tomorrow morning, what are the solutions?
It's a job that I don't think I'm interested in. But look, I think to be on the real, we do require some serious reforms in how we deal with budgetary prioritizations.
Yeah.
We need to, and I made the point earlier on about the needs of a country. If we take a country as a body, and we need to start there before we go and do things that are niceties. And if a government would be having that type of maybe one might want to call it a solution model, where we deal with things such as health as a critical element, education is a critical element, and then we build from there.
Yeah.
Of course, job creation being one of them, and generally the economy. So my perspective for this particular problem, because of course I'm speaking advocacy for health and for doctors, is that the money that's available must be reprioritized. We can't have flags for 20 million. Like we saw a couple of years ago. We can't have advertising on a jersey on for $1 billion. We need to have a decisive, well-functional government that is in sync. You can't have a treasury that almost is clueless of other constitutional priorities that the government must be addressing. And I think that's where it will not be an individual brilliance of a minister. It must be a government collective. So and unfortunately, if a government is not capable and it's failing, and that's the situation that would land us in now to say, but is the government really capable? Is the government really doing what it should? Because you might find that we are where we are because of a failing government. Like you say 2 decades later, and there are certain things that we are still not getting right.
Yeah,
something's not adding up.
Not right.
Something's not adding up. Yeah.
What are the numbers of doctors that are likely to be unemployed right now?
Doctors that are unemployed right now is over 1,000. So I'll give you how the statistic came about. We, in around about November, started receiving email correspondence from many of our members who were saying, look, I'm completing my community service. I've applied throughout the country for job to start in January the 1st. I've been having no replies. In some instances, departments are saying that there's no budget. They'll be reviewing that sometime in the year, but they've got almost like moratorium of not appointing and so on and so forth. Can Samatu please assist us get jobs? And we saw these emails coming up. And the initial statistics, we had about 200 emails, and we'd correspond with these doctors on a regular, created a group. And then we brought this up with the department, and I think there was an interview, one of the national radio stations, and then it just took off like wildfire.
Whoa, Me Too. You had a Me Too movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
Right. So the numbers started going up, and before we knew it, it had doubled to 400. Right. That was just about before December, and at that time, one departmental representative from the Department of Health had come out and said, give us the list, we'll appoint these guys, or we'll ensure that they get appointed.
Just like that.
So we put together the list.
There they are.
We say, there you go. Then suddenly, and initially, the first day, they said, no, we need this and that on the list. Within 24 hours, it was inserted ID numbers and stuff like that, sent it back. Now, come January or so, now these doctors are realizing that they actually, it hits them that they're actually not unemployed.
Yeah.
Initially, they were going to be unemployed come end of December.
They were applying in advance.
Yeah. Yes. Now come end of December, it's now January, and now they are really unemployed. So when some, I think, a national TV station picks up the story and says, can we have this conversation? Then everybody now picks up that, hey, I'm also affected. I'm also at home. And that number went from 400 to over 1,000 within literally a space of 2 days. And that's the numbers that we've been sitting with. And we've been having, we had a march as well, a national march. We also went to the minister's offices, and we handed over a memorandum to him. And the understanding was that by the 27th of February, we'd be given a sort of concrete report on
this
what...
Is now.
Yeah, this is coming next week or so.
Yes.
In weeks, concrete response on, absorb, because we had demands that want the doctors to be appointed in 2 weeks, want this and that and that. So all those demands were there. So we are anticipating now to get a solid response from the minister in terms of what has been done from when we delivered the memorandum a month ago. But I can tell you now that we still have doctors in that number still sitting at home. So we're just looking forward to having this meeting to find out what has really been done. And
this is a doctor that said Me Too.
Yes.
It's possible there's someone that hasn't said Me Too.
Absolutely. And that's the point, is that the numbers that we have are purely on those that have reached out.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who rather stay in a corner somewhere, not really come out. But
and think they can solve
it. Yes. But the numbers that we have are just over 1,000.
And the intern doctors, at some point you're 250. In reading the information, that's been solved.
Yeah, for interns, fortunately, like I was making the point that this time around, it was quickly, sorted out. Community service doctors also quickly sorted out. It's now those ones who have actually done the statutory, statutory years, internship in community service, who are now fully qualified, independent practitioners, capable, very competent.
That are ready.
Ready. Those are the ones who are now sitting at home.
What about the argument that says a doctor is immediately given a skill that they can use almost like a business and open their own private practice?
You see, that's the point we've been making, that surely that defeats the point, doesn't it? Because we're coming from the premise that says 90% of the population cannot even afford something as basic as your bread, putting bread on the table. We now give 350 to some of our citizens, right? A doctor's consultation might be 400 bucks,
to 500
bucks.
Yes.
Now, you got to tell me that I've got 350 here. That
food
must last me the whole month. I've got a cough. I go and give it to a guy in private. It doesn't make sense. And that's not, if that's what we designed as a healthcare system, really as a government, we're not thinking straight. Because even the very Constitution says that we must be in a position to make primary healthcare available to our people. And if our people are unable to access adequate and proper healthcare, then we are failing.
The statistics that you gather, shouldn't they be also coming from, because doctors registered to be medical doctors,
Sure.
isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a
HPCSA, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So shouldn't that also be a portal for that type of information, or you don't, or how you're doing it makes enough sense for you to have a sense of the numbers? Essentially, I'm asking, is there a better way of knowing how many doctors
Thank you for the
are
question.
unemployed? Yes.
We made the same point to the Department of Health. In fact, when we took out a media statement that we are going to be marching to the Department of Health because of the unemployment of doctors, there was a media statement that was released by the NDOH saying that, they are not sure where these doctors are. They've been asking for a list from the union. They're still waiting for the list. We said, hold up. You are a government official, fully appointed to manage human resource and recruitment. Now, we tell you that there's X number of unemployed doctors, and you're going to sit at home and say, I'm waiting for a union official to give me a list. What are you doing?
Yes.
What is your responsibility in ensuring that there's proper, adequate healthcare provision, and by so doing, ensuring that you go and recruit doctors to go and service those far-flung communities that don't have doctors? Because you're sitting with communities in Gangelizwe, in Matatiele, and so many other places where there are no doctors. And you say, well, you're waiting for a list from a union to tell you that doctors are unemployed.
A union.
It's ridiculous. Now, that's coming from a government official. So it tells you that they've either, derelicted on their duties, and they've actually made us the de facto ministers and HODs,
Because an ideal scenario is they need to know how many doctors are in Matatiele.
A government must know.
Yes. That. How many doctors are needed in Matatiele at any given time?
Yes.
How many doctors will be qualifying this year from all the institutions that we have, and how many of those are we able to absorb?
Yes.
And they should know the statistics of doctoring.
David, you and I we're talking common sense, but sometimes common sense is not so common.
You said there are areas in the country that don't have doctors.
Yes.
Paint this picture for me. Are you saying there are communities in this country right now, and let's think of a community as how do we define a community in this context? As a place that has a name.
Okay.
Let's call it a municipality.
Okay.
Because you have to bring it down from the South African community to the smallest.
Okay.
A place that has a name, and that name is Mamelodi. It's my township.
Yeah.
And are you saying there are places like that in the country with a name, possibly with a council or councillor or councillors that do not have a medical doctor that works for government?
Well, how government deals with that is that even if you did have a place that doesn't have a doctor, which you do, they'll have us rotate, meaning that there'll be a guy coming in a government van attending to 4 clinics, maybe on a Tuesday.
Okay.
Right? But in that instance, of course, it's this one doctor who's known in the community who will be coming to a particular region. We know on Tuesdays he starts there. That's the one strategy, suppose, that is being used to mitigate the fact that there are no doctors. So what that means is, should you be, some communities, you have to drive about 40, 50 Ks to get to a proper facility where you get attended by a doctor. Meaning that if there's a CHC and it's not equipped with equipment or doctor.
What is a CHC?
Community health center.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Yes. It's a clinic.
It's a clinic.
Yeah.
Right? And should you need emergency health care, the best that you could pray for is to be taken to the next level 1 hospital. You might find that there's a bit of a distance, but it's because of also our sparse geographic, layout as a country. But that happens quite often, quite a lot, especially in the far-flung communities in the villages where you might have 5 villages that are serviced by 1 clinic, but that 1 clinic doesn't have a doctor. So even that clinic has to take it to somewhere closer to the city. To the closest clinic. Yeah. So there are places like that. There are numerous places. Because I know of stories where we are ziguti on a Wednesday gune dokotela. Yes. So gibela in the back of a buggy and go just to be seen, and the queue is ridiculous. And this doctor is there for 5 hours. Yes. Because they have to travel somewhere else. Yes. It's precisely the point we've made. And if, like you're saying, in some of the interviews we've done, we're saying it just does not make sense to us to say there's one doctor, an entire village queuing to see that one doctor, and in most instances, to get a repeat script for high blood medication or Panado.
Yes.
Now, we're saying you can't have a situation like that when you've got thousands sitting at home. Because those are the people that are supposed to say, instead of coming once on a Tuesday, you spread it out. There's a doctor every day for 5 days or 7 days. Therefore, you can choose to go on a Thursday, you won't queue.
There's no queue.
There's no queue. But the moment you say, in that entire locality, there's only going to be one doctor on a Tuesday, you're going to see the scariest queues
that you've ever seen.
And that's what our people are being subjected to. That's the point we are making, really, is that is what our people are subjected to. But you now, David, I'm not sure you're with medical aid, but somebody like a minister.
Interesting. Let me tell you my story with medical aid. For the longest time, I didn't have it. Because I don't get sick.
Okay.
That's always been my point. I don't get sick.
Yeah.
I don't see the need to be paying this 3,000.
Prolonged period.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah. And so I stayed like that for the longest time. Yeah. Until I sat down with one of the financial advisor, and he said, you're older than you think. Yeah. You may need to get one. So I got it, and then I needed it so badly.
Immediately.
Stories don't always work out that way. Mine worked out that way.
The other way around. Exactly. Sometimes the other way around.
Yes. Jeez. So you're saying, in my like a person that has a medical aid.
Yeah. So you would, if you needed attention now, and we can go down to Mill Park there, you'll be attended to immediately.
Absolutely.
And you'll be back here in studio within 45 minutes max. You know, you've got your medication, you sorted. Now, that's not the case for our people in the communities that we're coming from. They have to wake up at 3 to go and stay in a queue. They're waiting for this doctor to drive from the cities to come and attend to them. It's that one day of the entire week. And they miss that doctor. And the problem what that creates is a culture of saying, I know I'm not going to get attended to because at 3 the doctor has to leave because they have to drive back to the city. And if I'm not going to be attended to, why do I even bother? And whatever sickness that you have, which could have been attended to earlier, it actually gets worse and worse. So by the time you actually really need healthcare, it's late. Sometimes you might find people with very advanced breast cancer. And we see this in our grandmothers, where it started off as a painful little,
it could have been attended to.
And because the prospects of being seen were just so low that they just couldn't take standing in a queue for so long just to go to the clinic and be attended to. So that meant that it means that over time, this becomes a huge mess and it becomes fungating. And by the time they present to us, they've got metastasis to the brain, to the liver, and all over the place.
Because cancerous cells move around. They spread. They don't stay in one area.
And that's what we see. So even the health-seeking behavior almost gets modified by virtue of the fact that you know that your chances of getting attended to properly are not there. And that's 90% of our population, mind you.
Let's talk about the long queue. A doctor is prescribed in terms of how long they can see a patient.
Sure.
Is there something like that exists?
Yeah.
You can't see 1,000 patients in one day.
Yeah.
It's impossible, essentially. It says, because when a doctor keeps billing medical aids and they say, hey,
this is
Dr. Sihlangu has seen 1,000 people yesterday.
How is it possible?
It's not possible.
Yeah.
So clearly there must be a prescription of how many patients can a doctor see.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to tell you from the public healthcare perspective and maybe come back to the private.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about a government that has almost lost touch with what's happening on the ground. Now, the HPCSA, specifically for those who are still in training, like interns, it will say that it's not recommended or not advisable. You shouldn't be working beyond periods of 24 hours. And what used to happen is you have these interns or doctors generally who work from 8 o'clock in the morning. The next day, 8, they're still standing.
Yes.
Work until 12 midday, continue to work until 4. Now, that person is a walking zombie. Yeah. They're not really functional.
No.
And you want to entrust that person with somebody's life? You're actually risking. You're putting people's life at risk. And moreover, you're putting that person's life at risk because what we used to see is that as soon as this person walks out the hospital premises, gets into their car, driving to the highway, they fall asleep.
And now you have a new problem.
You've got a new problem. And we've seen so many tragic situations purely on that. Now, so definitely there is some soft limit of what a human, is capable of. It might not be spelled out so well, but it's there. So what you find now with recommendations to various departments is say, after you've completed a 24-hour cycle, you must be allowed a period of break of rest, and then you can continue.
Like any working environment.
But in health, it's not so enforced. So the administrators turn a blind eye because they know if you are the only one on the floor and you say you want to leave at 8, the people that are waking up, coming to the hospital in the morning, are coming to queue in the outpatient department.
And you're not there.
And you just left. Who are you leaving them to? So they'll say, no, you can't go now. Keep on seeing some patients until 1. Maybe we'll let you go at 1. And different hospitals practice different things. Other hospitals will tell you, you're not going anywhere. Your contract says you're going to give me 40 work hours a week, and you got to work those work hours. And it creates a very, very problematic situation where we are subjecting our people to very dangerous doctors.
Both of them are getting a raw end of this deal there because the patients are getting a doctor
an non-functional doctor,
and the doctor is just stretching themselves.
Yeah. So to go back on the private one, I mean, that one, what the medical aides are saying is that they want to curb behavior that becomes now abusive, where you want to and we see some busy practices, busy GP practices, but at some stage it becomes poor quality healthcare. If you're gonna walk in and say, okay, I think I know what you have, sign a prescription, send you out. Next, that's not how we're trained. If we know that on a day these are your work hours, and you tell us that you've seen 100 patients, we start to wonder because there's only so much time you have in a day. So
that means you saw a patient a minute.
A minute. And is that really quality healthcare?
No.
Then we know something is wrong. So I think those are the two extremes. That on the one side, the public doctors are abused, and then on the other side, there's an allegation that the private doctors are abusing the system. So it's,
we have a crisis. Both ends, the deal is raw.
It's raw, yeah.
Wow. COVID-19 surely taught us something.
Yeah.
We've changed the way the world works with as a result of COVID-19. Hell, you can have 10 meetings a day without having to move out of your bedroom.
Of course, yes.
And that's just one aspect of it. But COVID-19 as a whole had to do with the medical sector, with the healthcare system. What have we learned that we've taken from the rest of the world? China built hospitals in 2 minutes. What have we done?
Look,
besides burning a hospital,
and besides PPE scandals, right?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Look, I think from a healthcare perspective, we must say that our frontline workers, did exceptionally well during COVID-19. We were working under very strenuous conditions. At some stage we were working without PPE, by the way. And you just be told that you got to attend to the patients. That's the bottom line. So, healthcare practitioners, both doctors, nurses, and everyone in the front line, you'd actually be risking not only your lives, but because at the time COVID was a scary thing, you'll be living with the risk of bringing that to your own family.
Yes.
And causing sickness within the family. And we've seen many, family members having died, and people are living with guilt, believing that
I brought it home.
That I brought it home, But that being said, I think our response overall as a country was quite good, was quite great. But again, we would want to give politicians credit, but I think most of the credit goes to those who are actually in the front line, who've sacrificed themselves. Because the reality is that if you look at what was transpiring in the background with the PPE scandals and the looting that was happening, I would be disinclined to say government did that great when it's the actual human beings that you and I see in the taxis when we go home every day that we're actually in the front line. So if there's anything, it taught us that we've got a very resilient and very strong healthcare workforce.
Irrespective of the challenges.
Exactly. So the people who are in the system in the front line, who were standing as soldiers, guarding all of us, they're phenomenal. And I think that's what we've taken from COVID and its tragedy. And we obviously, it means that we've also learned a couple of things as well, what works, what doesn't work. And I think from a planning perspective, obviously, God forbid, we have another pandemic. But from a planning perspective, I think we've learned key lessons that would invariably take a decade to learn. This would have been for many like the practicals. If you had the theory of pandemics and you've read about the Spanish flu and so forth,
absolutely.
It's just a theory. None of us were there.
No.
But it's only now where we've been through it.
There's a generation of people who know what they're talking
about.
Yeah.
So we've definitely come up with some sharp skills that I think as a generation, as a collective of healthcare practitioners, we will take going forward.
Have we learned anything as an overall society, including government, of how to deal with such? And maybe learning is one thing, but have we implemented anything? I bet you there are countries who've advanced their medical facilities, things like that.
Yeah, sure.
Have we moved? And when I say move, I always speak largely of the public sector, not the private.
Sure.
Have we done any of those type of moves in that regard?
Yeah, you would have heard, I think in Cape Town, there's this facility now that's been upgraded for actually production of vaccines. I think that there's a lot of money that's being pumped into that sector of vaccine development.
Because it's not something that we never used to do prior to this.
We had a company that was doing that, but I think we've upscaled.
Okay.
And obviously what we're looking at now is obviously diversifying, because COVID is here, but there'll be other pandemics.
True.
So what we're relying on, remember when COVID hit? I remember I was doing quite a lot of interviews at the time with various media houses regarding the Johnson & Johnson and so forth. Which one should we go for? Even us at the time, we were quite not sure. We had to just quickly look at the literature and come up with something sound and to say, okay, we think we're happy with doctors generally, taking this Johnson, even if at the time it was that Sisonke,
there
trial,
were all sorts. Oh, yes, of course.
So I think going forward now, it would not only be South Africans or Africans at large relying on the global West when such a pandemic happens, where we'll say we're waiting for a vaccine to come from outside. We must now, and I think that's the trajectory that we're taking, we must now put ourselves in a position where we can be responsive. We can have the same way we had a Chinese vaccine and the Russian one.
The Russian vaccine, there were all sorts.
There was all sorts. Yes. So we now need to be in a position where, should anything of this nature happens, we say, here's the African vaccine. This is what we're bringing to the world. And let it compete at that level. And I think that's what we take from this going forward. That
we've done that. We've at least managed to move one step forward.
We are putting systems, So we're putting systems in place now. We are putting infrastructure in place now. That's taking us that direction, that when we've got the proper capacity and proper technology to even respond to any pandemic, then we know we are actually in a safer space. Because one of the issues, I remember there was this, they call it vaccine apartheid. Because now we were saying the African countries are the last to be considered. And it was we would even look with a bit of a sad eye when we see loads of vaccines being distributed
everywhere
in Europe,
else, yes.
and we were still waiting. And at that time, we were losing our family members, and we're saying, when is this thing going to arrive? So I think it has taught us a lesson as Africans, not only South Africans, but as Africans. We need to be self-sufficient. And I think I'm hoping that that's what we take out of this as a positive, and we put systems in place now. Because you got to plan for 100 years, you got to plan for 50 years, and you got to do it now.
I worry that we're not planning for 5 years.
So
based on the example you made earlier. I remember one of the famous interviews, not even interview actually, it was a presentation, I think it was a TED Talk done by, what's his name, Bill Gates.
Okay.
Talking about future pandemics and how we're not ready.
I think I remember that one,
Exactly. There's always been talk about, are you ready for whatever it is? I remember years prior to 2010 World Cup, we were always talking about being World Cup ready. Our airports World Cup ready.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Our hospitals ready to take on all these millions of people that are coming to the country. Are we, as a South African healthcare system, ready? Yes, we may have survived, and we didn't really, because we lost millions of people. We lost hundreds of thousands of South Africans, parents and fathers and mothers and colleagues and all of that. So talking about being ready is not a proper phrase, because there's someone who say, my mom died.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean?
No, true.
So that means we were not ready. So the question is, are we looking at the entire healthcare system, particularly, and I know I said entire, particularly when it comes to training of doctors and getting doctors into the system, are we ready for the next COVID-19? And because we know exactly what that was, are we ready for the next one?
I think we are probably not ready, purely on the basis that if we all agree, looking at our doctor-patient ratio, which is again skewed for the worst, it's one doctor to over 3,000 population.
Is that a real statistic?
That's our South African statistic. Worse than countries like India, for example, and so forth.
With triple our population, if not a lot more.
Exactly. So just purely on that, We're not. Remember, we are failing to cope with the trauma at Bara, with the trauma at Tembisa,
Daily
with the
trauma
in Sishiko, with the trauma in you name our communities. We are struggling to cope there, right? So you add more to the burden of disease by bringing in other factors.
By bringing COVID?
The system is collapsing. It's collapsing now. You know, we look at our oncology backlog, where patients are going untreated for cancer, where there's no in Mpumalanga there's no oncologist. I know they're trying to put something together now, but where patients are on the list to go for radiation therapy, they have to come to Gauteng. And you talk of many other communities where there's just looking at the orthopedic backlog, where patients sit in the hospitals for up to 4 months waiting for an operation until their legs or limbs heal with deformity. Oh. Where a simple procedure could have just allowed that leg to heal properly aligned.
Yes.
Now you've been waiting, this thing sitting like this, and it's 4 months down the line, and sorry, we're going to discharge you.
Your body will find a solution to the problem.
And those are the South African problems. You compound that with another addition to the current burden of disease.
Because you're describing a COVID-free period.
Yeah. where we're struggling as it is. So
no, we're not.
No, we're not ready. No, we're not.
so even using, that's why I corrected myself when I said we didn't do so badly with COVID. We did.
We did.
A lot of people died.
Yeah,
that's just the reality of it.
Course.
You can't see it any other way.
Of course, COVID was obviously a different animal, but we did badly because one life lost is one life too many. Yeah.
Jeez. Compared to other African countries.
But remember, I think that we shouldn't obviously be too we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much. I think in terms of reporting and everything, we were quite on the ball. Right?
There's a lot we did right.
So there's a lot we did right. Now, you know, to obviously compare us to some of our African counterparts. Remember, reporting there was not even to many countries, was not even a thing.
No.
Reporting was, there's one president of, I think it might have been Tanzania, who passed on, who himself was going around saying, don't worry about this COVID thing, and God forbid he passed on from COVID.
Yes.
But it tells you that in Africa generally, there was a very sluggish response to the whole thing, and also the reporting might have been.
Yeah.
So you might find that in relative terms, there were less deaths there, but it's because there were less registered deaths, compared to our systems that were quite on the ball with keeping up, the numbers.
When we talk the challenges we have in South Africa with doctors, are there countries that are facing similar challenges? I imagine they are. They should be. In Africa, compared to other first world countries?
We did one interview with one of the Nigerian TV stations.
Yeah.
So they were saying, in Nigeria, for example, they quite have a lot. The production is quite good
of doctors.
Of doctors,
yeah.
And it so happens that unfortunately their doctors also get taken by the global market. And South Africa is one of such poachers of, if I have to use that term,
we poach from Nigeria.
From Nigeria, yes. Right? So for them, it's not so much a lack of employment. That population generally gets taken up by the rest of the world. Yes. So they almost have an undersupply by virtue of their own doctors going out.
Yeah.
It's not that they want to give them jobs, which is different with us, is that we can't give them jobs, so they leave.
Yeah. How, on average, is a doctor ready to leave the minute they qualify?
Yeah, the moment you are independent practitioner.
The minute you finish your
internship in ComServe,
yes,
you are fully qualified independent practitioner. You can go to any country. What will happen when you get to those countries? Of course, each and every country has got its own criteria. Mm-hmm. They might recognizing, because what the regulatory bodies, right, HPCSA and others from the world, they evaluate each other and grade each other and grade the capacity or quality of practitioners in that country. So you might find that the UK accepts South African doctors without even
making a fuss.
So if you want to go there, they'll simply say, okay, you HPCSA registered, we just link you in. You can work. Or they might say there's just this one English test and this entry test on this and that, then you integrate it. Then they might say
it's a language thing,
here
not
there.
the skill.
Yeah, because there's those agreements amongst the regulatory body. So that is why it's not a difficult thing for South African doctor to go to Canada, to go to the UK, to go to maybe even Australia for that matter. So
are those our poachers?
Yeah, main poachers. And of course we see those who are specialists from here, who go overseas. They might be made to write just one board exam just to be sure that they're actually at the level of a specialist. Then they're in the system. Because even our own locally trained specialists are held in high regard in other countries. So it's not really an issue for us to get jobs outside there. It's like our engineers as well. Most of them,
they leave.
Yeah, they leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nurses leave.
Exactly.
We actually have a lot of nurses that leave.
Absolutely.
I know someone that ran an agency that gets people out.
Of course,
It's almost like human trafficking. There's so much of it happening.
Exactly. Even by the way, to Dubai, our healthcare workers are accepted there. Yeah.
And is there a lot of, and maybe the reason I ask this question is if there's such a great need for doctors in most parts of the world, and there's a demand, let alone need, there's actually a demand for them, then why aren't these doctors that are frustrated at home not just leaving?
But they are. That's the point we're making, is that we are now in a situation where we're seeing our doctors leaving, and these doctors are leaving with a very sore heart because their intention was always to serve their people. Remember, most people that become doctors come from this background of saying, I want to serve. I want to care for my people. And a big number of them, in fact, would be coming from these far-flung communities, from these villages, and they grew up saying, I want to improve the situation at home.
Back at home.
But now when they don't have a job, they've got an entire family that was ululating, celebrating of them becoming a doctor, believing that we'll have bread on the table. And when they can't provide here, they really feel hard done and they feel, stuck. So the only way is to say, I'm going to go overseas to look for employment so that I can be able to take care of you at home. And that's really the simple transaction.
Send money back, basically. And because, you're talking about the ululation of the celebration that goes with being a doctor. Being the first to go to university is a celebration. Being the first to be a doctor is a huge celebration.
Absolutely.
You can't even match that one.
Absolutely.
That our child is a doctor. So surely the pain, you used the similar phrasing that, there's a huge pain of, surely the pain of being home as a qualified doctor must be 10 times worse than any other guy who's unemployed. Not that
anyone else, of course. We make the point that we're starting to see quite a lot of mental health issues amongst our doctors. We're seeing a lot of anxiety, problems coming up. Substance abuse has become a big issue in the medical community. And we're seeing now suicide. And that tells you the state of mind that our junior doctors are at. Because it's all these dreams and aspirations and of an imagination of what life will become, how it will be once you've reached that level, and that anticlimax where you're suddenly there, but it's nothing.
There's nothing at all.
And you are sitting there at the corner of your village in the community with everybody else. And of course, you're sitting with a medical degree and that type of level of feeling defeated. And of course, unfortunately, our societies will say, siyafana nalaba, I want that type of thing to say. So that's unfortunate, and that is quite painful. To somebody who would have gone their whole life trying to become something, and that's why we see this level of depression amongst our doctors, junior doctors for that matter. Suicide. We've seen young guys committing suicide, and I kid you not, it's the most painful thing.
And largely because of this problem.
Of this situation.
Who do you represent in the picture? Unions generally represent people who have jobs. Because they get money from that. However small it may be, there's a contribution. But you seem to represent even the unemployed in your sector, which is rather different.
But remember, we represent, we're a union, so we represent the working class, right? And we are a professional union representing professionals who are doctors, right?
True.
Now, of course, from the moment somebody goes into medical school to the time when they're about to complete, we've got vested interest in them.
Of course.
Meaning that we need to ensure that they're taken care of, even at that transition point from being a student to being an employee, because the world of work is totally different from being a student. the labor laws, as they kick in, the moment you enter your workplace, are so much. And if you don't know them, you can make so many mistakes. So we've got interest there. And remember, when you're a student, you're unemployed. But when you get your first letter of appointment, you're employed. So it's a very...
That transition.
So we're there for you during that transition. But remember, and I said, some people would work internship, so they're employed.
True.
They'll finish internship, possibly also finish community service, and then go out of employment, which is what we're facing with now.
Yes.
So you've been a member, probably even contributing through membership in the union throughout your 2-3 years, and then suddenly you're out of employment. So as a responsible union,
you have to stay with this guy.
You've got to kick in and protect your interests and defend your interests, because we understand that you, in any event, you're useful to community, or to the community when you're at work. We can't sit back and say, well, you're out of a job, you're no longer relevant to us. You are so relevant at that point, because ours is not just about having you as a member for the sake of being a member. It's about what you are meant to do. And we are advocates for society. Remember when we were doing the strike, one of the things we said was that the march, not the strike, the march was that it was it was us raising the plight of the poor and the marginalized. It was not only about doctors being unemployed.
Interesting. I saw that where you're saying it's not our march only. It's the march of the people.
And surprisingly, when we were in Pretoria, community came. Not only doctors. We had nurses. We had normal people. That would be in the community who came to participate in that march because they understood what it meant. If they don't have access to healthcare, they're the ones affected. And that's what this is about.
There's a narrative that I keep coming across when I hear about unemployed doctors that says, but doctors don't want to work in certain areas. It's the weirdest narrative that because I have a lot of doctor friends. I'm very lucky in that regard. I've never known doctors to be like that. And it surprised me when I got that. Where does that narrative come from? And where do they say they don't want to go to work?
It's one of the most unfortunate but very mischievous comments that I can tell you now categorically comes from somebody in the Department of Health, national level.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate because in fact, in one radio station, doctors were calling in en masse, confirming that we are here prepared to go to any area in this country. We just want a job, almost begging for a job.
What?
And somebody wants to come in their shiny suit and say, these ones don't want to work, and you close.
They don't want to work
door.
in Madrid.
No, that narrative is so unfortunate. But I can tell you now categorically that these cohort of doctors that you're talking about are young men and women who are determined, prepared to serve South Africa and the community at large. They are coming from these far-flung communities. They want to go back and serve. And that's the cadre that we're talking of when we say doctors are looking for employment.
Yeah.
That's absolutely it.
This problem that we're facing, does it affect the attraction to the career?
Yeah.
Does it affect a guy who keeps hearing this conversation similar to this, who's interested in being a doctor and thinking maybe I should go into IT or something or be a YouTuber? Does it affect the attraction to the profession?
I would imagine it does, because remember there are a lot of pull and push factors, especially when you look at the matriculants as they have to make decisions. And now in the era of social media where they're always on their phones, they watch podcasts like this.
Yeah.
They keeping up with articles, newspapers, TV news, Now, it means that when they see these type of conversations, invariably as a human being, you'd get concerned. You say, wait, I wanted to do this thing.
Yeah.
But if there's a chance that I will not even be able to practice my craft, then is it really...
earn a living.
Is it really worthwhile? So, of course, we don't have the statistics, but we do worry that it might serve as a deterrent or as a disincentive of somebody watching saying, maybe I might as well go and do something else, something in the humanities maybe, or in the other sciences like actuarial science. And we see a lot of bright minds now of late saying, I want to do actuarial science. Back then, the top achievers in the country, and you go to any newspaper, you ask them, what do you want to do? They say medicine.
Yes.
And now you open your research newspaper as actual science.
Actual science.
If you're from the old school, you're like, what is this thing?
Yeah. This actual interesting. In my high school matric, there's one guy who went into actual science.
Yeah.
There's a few doctors and there's a number of lawyers and accountants.
Yeah.
Interesting. We produced a lot of accountants in my era of going to school.
Yeah.
But you're right in saying that there's generationally you find a lot of attraction to particular careers.
Yeah.
But doctors has fairly been consistent. Yes.
We're starting to see that the change now. We say, okay, now there's more fancy things. I mean, we hear things like computer science.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the guys who've done very well, we've seen now recently, will tell you of robotics.
Jeez.
And actual science being one such a career that people are putting out there. So that in itself means that when you see this career path being medicine being spoken about, but in a bad light, no jobs, no this and that, and you having a matriculant sitting and having to weigh their options, and they're looking at the alternative, and it's painted in beautiful lights and beautiful offices and suits, maybe.
You'll work for Google.
Yeah, they're like, maybe this is where I need to go. And that's the danger, because the moment we go that route, the problem becomes bigger.
Yeah.
When people don't want to be doctors and yet health is the only constant, really, you're going to have a problem.
Jeez. I think we have an incredible inability to see the future.
No.
But we can predict it when we do certain things.
Of course.
Or we can anticipate. Of
course,
how when you're approaching a traffic light, there's three possibilities. You slow down because it's caution, it's red or green. You can anticipate
of
that.
Course, yeah.
Why is it that, and I don't think you have an answer to this, that we are completely incapable of seeing these things, because we can't have the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years of a kid that could have been a doctor. And that means we have one less doctor,
yes.
10 less doctors, 1,000 less doctors that we could have, and yet our population is growing.
Yes.
Why is it that we have this incredible inability to see information that's so obvious in front of us?
Maybe we do see it, David, but we ignore it, because it might be, and unfortunately there's no way of knowing, but it might be that because we are so myopic in our thinking that we look at now for now. So if my performance indicator says that I must just show that I sent X number of students to Cuba, that satisfies me, right? So this guy is looking at the immediate. Or if I must just indicate that Wits or UP graduated X number today, and that satisfies me. But when you're not looking at that in relation to the growing population, tomorrow when you're out of that job, you're like, well, when I was there, things were well.
Yeah.
When I was the chief director of this, things were well. But you never really did what you should have, because in comparison or in relative terms, you ought to have done more.
And it's possible also that you were the beginning of the problem.
Yes.
But you left before the problems were too big.
It sounds like ESCOM.
Are we operating like it's business as usual currently?
We are, which is unfortunate. Because if we were not, would have drastic steps being taken.
Really drastic.
But we wake up every day, put on our suits, if you go to work, come back, and that's it. It'll be another day. There's no real agency.
Do you know, I asked this question on literally after you said ESCOM, and the problems are almost identical. We operate like we even get used to standing in queues in relation to the healthcare,
exactly.
And we get used to the lights shutting down. When you walked in, maybe 10, 15 minutes into it, because you walked in a little early. There's load shedding. We're currently on load shedding as we speak. Yes, we're fortunate we have a system that allows us to carry on. But I remember when you walked in, I was upstairs having a chat. When I left you outside, there was load shedding right at that very moment, and I remember thinking, boy. But it's becoming a part of
our daily living, which is unfortunate. We've actually normalized it. It's like, this is South Africa.
Are we starting to normalize a disorganized healthcare system?
Yes, we are. And I think that has now been going on for the longest of time. I think the wheels started coming off a while back. We're just seeing the manifest, problems now.
Starting to show.
Yeah, it's starting to show. But the wheels started coming off a while back. And unfortunately, if you look at healthcare infrastructure, right? There's this narrative when people tell you, hey, things were better in apartheid. Hospitals used to work. And you can't actually blame them, because what we should have done is not only keep up, but develop more infrastructure. But because we slacked somewhere, only now we start to realize that, Bara is in a bad state. Tembisa is in a bad state. The population used to be X. Now it's Y.
And
but we still have this.
Anything.
We haven't done anything. Now it tells you that, and you said this correctly earlier when you said, maybe the problem started with somebody who's now sitting and pointing fingers. But the problem started there.
Yeah.
And we make the point that if we don't have a responsive government, it's going to be easy to then sit back and say, identify all the problems. Now, all we're doing now is troubleshooting. We've identified all the problems.
Run quickly and go do that. do you know, I was talking to my nephew earlier today about problems that compound.
Yeah.
And I used a student as an example.
Yeah.
And you and I will identify with this, that we have assignments because we have many courses. We have assignments.
Yes.
And one is due on Monday, the other one on Wednesday, the other one on Friday.
Yeah.
And you have 3 months to do them.
Yes.
You don't do anything.
None of them.
You keep postponing until the Friday before the 3 assignments come. And now you're running around. Friday is gone. Saturday you're running around, and now you're focused on the one you're supposed to do on Monday. You're struggling. Yeah. You're going to score 50, 49
At
or
most.
fail. Yes. And now you end up scoring 50, 49, fail one of them because one of them had to be dropped because there was just not enough to do it. You take that very example and apply it to South Africa and its compounding problems.
Yes.
I called you here to speak about healthcare space, particularly doctors that are unemployed. But you almost cannot ignore, and you this is your reference, the whole body.
Yes.
You can't ignore the whole person. You can't just address this and leave that. Yes. Because ultimately they all come together as one.
Absolutely.
They have these socio-economic issues that you deal with in the end. You end up dealing with crime.
Of course.
You end up dealing with unemployment and because you said, I'll do all these assignments in one weekend. It's not possible.
True.
And that's where we are. And now we speak of a collapsing road system.
Yes.
You speak of a collapsing healthcare system.
Yes.
Don't get me to start talking about electricity. And we're just talking about 3 simple examples. I think we're running out of time.
But you see, this precisely the point is that, and you call it compounding problems, is that if this was isolated, maybe we could argue that it caught us off guard. But it can't be that everything seems to be then crumbling. There's a common denominator, and I don't want to go there, but there's a just common factor. You say somehow, somewhere, we have not been governing properly. It can't be that today, today the grid is just in tatters and chaos. Healthcare is, don't even go there. And as you're mentioning the roads, the disasters that happen from time to time, I think that's excusable. But generally,
we can excuse bad rain that kills a bridge.
But there's a deeper seated problem that is just not gelling properly for to say.
Because you made reference to a comment, and I'm sorry to say that comment will happen more and more. Because we have a generation of South Africans like yourself, me, and many others who know apartheid. Not as a distant memory, as a recent memory. It's clear. I know exactly what my life used to be during apartheid, and I know how my life is now. So the comparison is not unfair sometimes because I can tell you, I used to have bread with butter during apartheid, and now I can't even find bread. That comparison is not complicated for a lot of people.
Straightforward.
Exactly. And that's why you'll struggle to find someone trying to say, no, but you can't say that. Because
it's a fact.
Yes. It's a fact. I'm not saying my mom and dad. I'm saying me.
I experienced,
Whoa.
That's a tragedy. That's where we are.
Where are we going with this one? Is government hearing you?
Look, particularly with our problem, we were meant to have a meeting with the minister just before SONA. But unfortunately, things got very complicated then. So we had agreed that, look, we'll stick to the timelines that we put in the memorandum. Now, that's our first deep stick to check if government is hearing us. Because if we were to go on any other activity before then, our engagements and so forth, they're not.
Yeah.
Because if they were, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Absolutely.
On the day of the march, the minister came up and said, this is embarrassing that he has to actually receive a memorandum.
He did receive
yeah,
it.
Yeah, he did. Complaining of doctors, not having employment, because it's such an obvious thing that should not be happening under any circumstances, and that he will address it immediately.
That was what, a month or so ago?
Yeah, it was just under a month ago.
Yes.
But we're still having doctors unemployed. So we're really looking forward to the meeting of the 27th. Hoping that miraculously on the eve of that, everyone will suddenly be having an appointment letter. But yeah, that's the situation. And that's really the problem that we've been raising, which we want to see immediatally addressed. Yeah.
Are you aware of budgets that are available for this type of thing, or you're saying reallocate?
Here and there, we're hearing murmurs about reallocation being done over something over $1 billion, but it's not reported as yet. I'm sure there'll be the budget vote, budget speech coming up, so we'll listen carefully.
Yeah.
But we do have some intel that it has reached the appropriate offices to understand the real situation. So, but one would not want to pronounce until it's actually pronounced by the executive authorities. So
and also you don't have an official statement anyway.
Yeah. Yes, so it's something that we keeping a very close eye on, with the hope that it is indeed accurate, because that will actually bring it will alleviate the current situation in its current form.
You're saying, and your vantage point naturally comes from a doctor saying my fellow doctors should be hired.
Yes.
It also comes from community members need to be helped.
Yeah.
And some will say the tourism sector needs funding because we employ people.
Yeah, sure.
And the argument in that space is the tourism sector is one of the few sectors that is not a government entity.
Yeah.
It's an independent entity. Do you know what I mean?
Largely independent,
Yeah, government doesn't own hotels, for example. It doesn't own and all these things that create jobs. So some would say, but we need you to spend money so you can attract the people in the UK so they can come to South Africa, and we are able to hire David Mashabela to come and DJ at that party. You get all of that.
Yeah.
So naturally, with that compounding example I used, you will eventually find heavily competing interests.
Naturally.
Yes. And we'll get to a point where the competition will be so high. Yeah. Now we're having taps that don't release water. So we'll have those, and one of them will be compromised. Are you saying, but you cannot compromise the employment of doctors in our current state?
Absolutely. In fact, to just touch on it, I think when you made the point earlier about priority of needs, you see, when you talk about water impacts on health. Invariably.
Immediately, yeah.
Because sanitation and disease, right? If you don't take care of that, you're causing a huge burden of disease. So remember, without a healthy nation, there's no economy.
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
So all we are saying is that our government must be mindful of health as a priority, because it will allow people to be able to wake up and go and waiter or waitress in these beautiful, luxurious hotels that you talk about. Without proper health, a sick nation cannot work, and that is the fundamental point that we're making. So, look, we've got no qualms with tourism.
As an example,
we've got no qualms with it. In fact, when it's appropriate, proper allocations must be made, but not when you are in a state of a crisis. Yeah. Let's look at the ethos of the notion or the notion of state of disaster. What does that mean? It means that at an appropriate time where there is indeed that particular state, you should be able to pause certain things, reallocate to deal with the particular problem. Yeah. We are saying for healthcare, that is where we are. It is in that particular state. And if you don't appropriately address it, you're going to compound the problem. And you make a very beautiful example about compounding problems. And that's where we're coming from.
You know, we seem to be having a lot of, I'll call them disasters. Yeah. And let's use the rain in KZN a year ago as an example. We can throw in COVID in there just for good measure. Yeah. You need doctors.
Absolutely.
You need doctors first.
Yes.
In all these disasters that we're facing.
Naturally.
We have high levels of crime.
Yes.
We have guns that are all over our society. Yes. We can't pretend they're not there anymore. You need doctors.
You know, that point that you're making, there was a study done, I think, by one of our research bodies in the country. Yeah. When you look at the rate of admissions during COVID, when there was an alcohol ban versus when there was, free flowing alcohol. And the amount of trauma and the amount of casualties that we see in our hospitals directly related to the amount of alcohol availability in the country is almost directly proportional, meaning that the more alcohol that's available freely, the more admissions you have, right? Now, it tells you again that most sectors of the economy go back to impact on health. Now, we wouldn't say, the alcohol industry is not relevant, it must be closed. But we're saying when you are addressing that industry, be mindful of the health consequence of it. Similarly,
and now you know it more than any other time.
So that's the point that we're making, that invariably most issues will come back to health. And when they come to health, they must find you there as a doctor.
In essence, if a simple narrative of the story is, if you're going to make alcohol available, you better make doctors.
You better have doctors, We spoke earlier at the beginning about step.
All those don't happen because people were having a good time.
They usually alcohol related, and they'll come back to Tembisa.
If you're going to have alcohol available, better have doctors in the
country, Wow. Absolutely.
I worry that we're dealing with a crisis that we are not all aware of. As South Africans, I can tell you for sure that government, if they are aware of it, they're not moving fast enough. There's an issue of pace that a lot of people speak of. When you speak electricity, pace is an issue. It's like quickly. When you're speaking education, when you're speaking healthcare, and many others, including a guy who just got 2 car tires burst because of a pothole today. It's a cost that government won't pay for. It places him in danger. I remember this lady said, I was driving to Lesotho and I got 2 tire bursts in the middle of the road in the middle of the night.
Shucks.
With a baby.
That's serious.
Do you see what I mean?
Scary.
So that means there's a pace issue in terms of how quickly we address this thing. And you and I will probably agree that pace is an issue with this one. It's urgent. Do they know that it's urgent, I wonder?
That's precisely our problem, and which is what we've been trying to enforce, to push rather hard, to say it can't be a continuous chronic problem where every year, January, we find ourselves in a similar situation. So pace is absolutely an issue. And if we need a solution, we must have a long-lasting one. It can't be this, short segment solution.
Hire them quickly.
But 5 months down the line, they're out of a job. And that's not what we want. We want long-term, sustainable solutions. And all of this is really, like I said initially, it's about ensuring that this country has access to adequate healthcare services. And to do that, you got to have doctors in our facilities.
But what Dr. Tolima learning, right? They must be like all of us.
There's no such a thing.
Dr. Sihlangu, I appreciate the time you've given us. We pray and hope for a better day. We pray and hope for, and somebody, a political analyst, I asked him, why are we like this as South Africans? That we have blind hope. That's our problem. We live in faith.
True.
And that's probably one of our biggest problems. But I appreciate the time you've given us. I hope this chat reaches the right people.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. There you have it. It's the South African Medical Trade Union.
Medical Association Trade Union.
It's the South African Medical Trade Union. The South African Medical Association Trade Union. And you serve as the General Secretary.
That's correct.
Wow. Such an important part. You have a lot of work to do. I wish you well.
We're trying.
I hope you get appointed as Minister of Health. You're a doctor and a lawyer. It doesn't get better than that. Thank you again.
King David Studio Podcast.